It is Thursday, the 1st of April, 2021, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside around the UK and internationally. I'm your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
And it's April Fool's Day, the day of the year you're allowed to lie to people.
That is true. We've got, we've got a long and storied history of doing April Fool's shows on this show. We put out fake episodes. We put out episodes that were missing. We've put out ones with fake presenters, and all of those were never actually released on April Fool's Day. And so this one is being released on April Fool's Day.
Out on April Fool's.
We've got such a prank lined up for you. We all forgot that it was April Fool's Day, basically.
Magnificent. I've been learning to cook still. I've been doing that. Recently, I've made American pancakes.
You sent a picture of those. Those look decent.
They did look good. You sound surprised that Mike can cook something decent.
Hold on a second. Where's the shocked tone coming in that?
Well, no, but I had every confidence that you'd be able to create something that would taste good. Every confidence.
Yes.
But the presentation, I thought, wasn't something that was in your locker.
So what I'd done for the presentation, right, is that, so I'd stacked 3 pancakes, the shit one at the bottom, because that's the way, the best looking one on the top. It's like a Penn Jillette autograph call, isn't it? So you put the shit one at the bottom. Like one of those
cheerleader triangles that they do in cheerleader practice.
But when I was in the States with Katie last time, we went to IHOP, International House of Pancakes, and had pancakes there. And what they do is they give you a little sphere of butter that sits on the top of the top pancake. And so I emulated that, but I didn't, how am I going to make a sphere of butter? So what I did was I used a 1/4 teaspoon measuring spoon.
Yeah.
As a kind of melon baller, but to make a butter ball and pop that on the top. Then just a little bit of maple syrup. Nice picture of that. Whack that up on Twitter for the likes, obviously, because fuck Facebook. So I don't use Instagram anymore. And yeah, it looked all right. Came out okay. There was steam rising. It was fresh out the pan. I was there fresh out the pan. Get the phone out straight away. I'll eat it cold if it looks good on Twitter. That's my priority here.
And that's just generally how food photography works, I think.
Yeah.
What about you folks? What have you been doing?
I got vaccinated. So did you, Mike?
I also got vaccinated, yes.
It's the most exciting thing that's happened to me in probably an entire year.
Yeah.
So I got a message through on my work Slack on Wednesday saying that somebody in the university, I don't even know who, it had come from some network group at the university and apparently went around the entire university, saying that there was a location in Liverpool that was offering walk-in vaccinations for basically anybody who showed up on the day. So I went. Marsh very kindly offered to drive me there and text everybody I know in Liverpool and said, if you fancy taking some time out of your work day to go and stand in a queue, you might have a shot at a shot.
Yeah. I just got a message from you saying, go get your vaccine. And I was like, what? And then a screenshot of whatever you'd seen saying they're giving vaccines away.
I didn't even have time to write customized messages to people. I just forwarded on the screenshot. It seemed very dodgy because it was just a screenshot from some unnamed person that I don't know saying you could go and get a vaccine, but it turned out to be legit.
There you go. The message of this show is always trust multiple forwarded WhatsApp messages. They always are reliable.
And I thought it was an interesting experience going to get the vaccine. I thought it was very, very comparable to yours, Marsh, in the sense that it was all business. It was sit down, take the details, give you the shot, and out again.
Very quick, yeah.
In my case, they gave me the leaflet that said these are all the side effects after they give me the shot.
Yeah, I got that then as well.
Oh no, mine. I was given mine beforehand. I was given the leaflet and my appointment card, my card that said that I'd had it before I had it, and then was given the vaccine immediately afterwards.
But that's okay. I ended up getting half naked in the vaccine.
Yeah, you always wear a suit.
Because I'd rocked up in my suit and they said, you're going to have to take your jacket off. So I was like, you know what? I can fucking cope with that. I can take my jacket off. That's not a problem.
You can manage that.
And they sat down and they said, right, we need you to roll your sleeve up. We need access to your upper arm. So I undid my cuff and rolled my sleeve up and they said, it's going to have to be higher than that. And I said, I'm going to have to take my shirt off then. I'm sorry.
You're as bad as that Tory Lord.
Well, so that's what's going to happen. So I had to take my tie off, undo my shirt.
Slowing up the queue.
Get one arm out in order to get a dose of AstraZeneca in the arm. So
the reason Nicola couldn't get vaccinated is because it took you so long to get your shirt off. That's why she got turned away in the queue.
That's what it was, turning people away at the end because I was there doing a striptease. I had the music on. I did the whole bit.
It's you and Tory peers. That's who get naked when getting vaccinated. If you'd have put a picture of it, you'd have gone viral.
But on a more serious note, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, obviously the point of the vaccine is to make you immune. And so in a lot of cases, what's going to happen is you will have an inflammation response to the vaccine. And it's one of the reasons sometimes people feel poorly after vaccines. It's not that they've caught a disease. It's that their body kind of thinks they have and responds as if they have. And so you get some of what you think are symptoms of illness, but is actually just, is your body having a reaction. And I got that quite bad. I was quite poorly for about 36 hours after the vaccine and, had a temperature and I felt rotten and, my head was foggy. And just from an empathy point of view, it really helped me because I've not had another vaccine since my BCG at school. And that did nothing,
I had the yellow fever one before I went to Brazil and I got like mild yellow fever from it.
Yes. But the yellow fever one's an attenuated virus, isn't it? The yellow fever one. So it does actually give you yellow fever.
Yeah.
But the COVID one obviously doesn't. It's the spike protein way of doing it. But when you see people who are vaccine hesitant, and I mean that not as people who are anti-vaccine, but people who have been persuaded by anti-vaxxers, effectively.
Yeah. The unsure.
When they say things like, the flu shot gives you the flu, I can kind of see what they mean. I mean, it doesn't. But when feeling as poorly as I did after the COVID shot, and it went away in, as I say, 36 hours, I was fine. But feeling as poorly as I did, it's like I can understand why people have got this idea that the flu shot gives you the flu. Especially because people massively underestimate what the flu is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because honestly, it's not like I needed to stay in bed or anything. I just felt a bit rotten and had a bit of a temperature. It wasn't debilitating in any sense, but I can understand where this idea of the flu shot gives you the flu has come from.
See, I've been in two minds as to whether to talk about the side effects that I had, because I was really ill. I woke up at 2:00 in the morning the night after I had the vaccine, shivering, freezing cold, really feeling very shaky, and then woke up again at 4 a.m. and progressively got worse throughout that morning with really severe side effects. I felt really, really unwell and spent the rest of the day in bed, well, on the sofa. And I've been in two minds as to whether to talk about it, because on the one hand, I think it's really helpful to talk about the fact that some people may get quite severe side effects, because if you're vaccine hesitant or you're unprepared for that and you suddenly have severe side effects that you weren't anticipating, that you've been told they're only mild, you're not going to get severe side effects, and then you get them, then you might, panic, be really worried, desperate for someone to help you because you're feeling so unwell without realizing that it might just go away fairly quickly. But B, that might be the confirmation that the vaccines are something to continue to be hesitant of, and then choose to not have the second shot or use it to argue to not have future vaccinations.
Or to people to argue to them not to get it.
Exactly, yeah. So from a vaccine hesitancy perspective, I think it's really important to talk about the whole range of side effects, and that you can have really mild, you can have no effects at all, you can have really mild side effects. And for most people, you're going to have one of those two, fairly mild or nothing. But that there are a proportion of people who will have quite severe side effects, and that is also normal. But on the other hand, I don't want to give people who might be anxious about getting the vaccine anxiety that they might have such severe side effects similar to the ones that I had, and then feel panicky about the vaccine that they get, and that for that to make it a more nerve-wracking experience than it needs to be. So I've been genuinely in two minds as to whether, and I still haven't fully come to a decision on that, as she says whilst talking about it on the podcast.
Yeah, I'd rather force the issue there, Alice. It's
but even then, like, I've not specified exactly what my side effects were. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's tricky because I felt awful for not very long. I was quite lucky in the sense that, and because I'm a nerd who's interested in the science of stuff like this, I like recorded everything essentially. So I can tell you what time I woke up with the worst side effects. I felt progressively worse from 4 a.m. until about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And then from then I started to gradually feel better throughout the rest of the day. But at that point, at that like 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, I felt horrifically ill. And luckily it started to pass quite quickly, and taking paracetamol really helped.
I found that actually. I found, I felt really, really bad. And then Lana said, take some paracetamol. Oh, fine, I'll take some paracetamol. And then was fine.
It made a massive difference.
And it was, oh wow, that really, really helped. That's peculiar.
It is interesting on the vaccine side effects thing, where because severe reactions are quite uncommon. If you were to say to people, there's a 1 in 30,000 chance you'll be floored for an entire day or something in that kind of area, people would be like, 1 in 30,000, that's quite a lot, in terms of the numbers. But it's funny how we work on risk in that kind of way, because if you look at the number of people who have died from COVID in this country, it's about 1 in, 500 adults? 1 out of every 500 adults. If it's about 150,000 people out of about 70,000 population, it's about 1 in 500 adults. And so the chances of am I right in those numbers? You're looking at me blankly.
I have no idea.
I haven't the faintest idea either, mate.
I think I'm about right on those numbers. If you 130,000 times 500 is going to be in the region of 70 million. So the fact that the people will not want to take a chance on the vaccine giving you severe side effects that you'll be totally fine from, but at the same time won't be weighing in the fact that it leaves them open to a disease that's already killed 1 in every 500 adults in the UK. Just that probability, I think, interesting.
It's the difference between being active and passive, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm now just going to check my maths.
Live maths checking.
Yeah, I'm absolutely right. 130,000 dead times 500 is 65 million. I'm right. Okay. Don't you doubt my ability to do maths on the fly.
No one was downing anything, mate. We just said we didn't know.
You're saying that because the podcast listeners could not see your expressions when I brought those numbers out. Which is like,
I mean, to be fair, my face does that anytime numbers are brought out. I don't do numbers very well. But yeah, it was a really cool, it was a fascinating experience. And I had like a single hour where I was like, this isn't fascinating anymore. For most of it, I was feeling horrific, going, at least, like, this is really interesting. Like, I feel awful, but this is really interesting. My body's having this reaction, and that's really cool. Then I had 1 hour where I felt so ill. I was like, no, I don't even find it interesting anymore. And then I started to feel better, so that was okay.
It's kind of like a horror movie, is what it is. It's like all of the sensation of being properly ill, but without any of the risk of anything actually happening.
But at least we are now, all three of us,
single jabbed,
first jab, vaccine.
I was single jabbed more than a month ago, mate. I'm riddled with antibodies. I've got them coming out my ears.
Seconds.
You had that Pfizer vaccine though, didn't you, mate?
Full on Pfizer.
Me and Alice, proper AstraZeneca. Good on this British vaccine.
I heard
British vaccine.
I heard a thing that I haven't bothered checking because it didn't seem important to check. But Pfizer has now produced 2 incredibly famous medical interventions. The COVID vaccine is their second fastest selling invention, even now still. That may or may not be true. Generally speaking, we try not to be too political on this show. Obviously, that's not always easy. We are human beings. We have views and opinions. And we don't particularly hide the fact that what you're listening to when you listen to this show is as close as we can see to evidence and reason, filtered inevitably through the lens of our own experiences and biases and opinions. We try to take out as many of our biases as possible by being aware of them, but you're always going to get stuff filtered through those. We try to be pretty open about it because I think if you see yourself as like an unbiased, neutral, dispassionate observer of reality, it's just a surefire way to be completely wrong and to disappear up your own biases faster than you can say James Lindsay. So we try to be as much as possible to anchor what we talk about to reason and critical thinking rather than to our own opinions, but this is going to come through sometimes. That said, we don't always keep politics out of things, and for me, nor should we. We were pretty openly critical of Trump's time in office, but that's because he was a conspiracy theorist who rose to power peddling deliberately populist lies and went on to deny science to the point that he very only recently and very reluctantly finally admitted that getting vaccinated against COVID-19 is a good thing, months after he quietly got himself vaccinated against COVID-19, of course. To stay silent in the face of that, as a skeptic and a critical thinker, wouldn't be neutrality, it'd be complicity. And so it's important to talk. The same can be said for the overwhelming cavalcade of bullshit that came out during Brexit, for example. Where no amount of tu quoque can distract from the fact that those running the Leave campaign dipped into the well of almost every logical fallacy and rhetorical sleight of hand possible in order to paint a vision of the future that was never going to come. And now, as the warnings that were dismissed at the time of being Project Fear, they continue to come to pass as were predicted, those same groups are spinning and swerving and repainting the past to pretend that this was the plan all along. We always knew this was going to happen. We always knew the fishing industry would be crippled by it, despite obviously not being something that was ever promised during the referendum. Failure to track that and to pretend that both sides were just as bad as each other, I think would be just as much an abdication of skeptical responsibility as it would be to overlook Trump's lies in a misguided and self-important quest for neutrality. So, from time to time, we're going to talk about things that are political. And some listeners might find that uncomfortable. They may even want to write us off as part of that woke, cultural Marxist, oppressive, bleeding heart, cancel culture left that we keep hearing about in most of the national newspapers and half the national broadcasters on a daily basis. But talking about politics is vital sometimes, because being apolitical is a luxury. And it's a luxury not everybody can afford to have. It's easy to have no opinion on rising sea levels when you live at the top of a hill. But when you live at the coast, things actually matter a lot more. That said, I'm not sure how much of what I'm about to talk about today is actually about politics, which might be surprising when I tell you that I'm about to talk about the London mayoral election. There are local elections happening all around the UK in May. There's even one here in Liverpool where we'll be able to vote to choose on a new mayor, hopefully one who won't be arrested over allegations of corruption. Fingers crossed. I don't know whether you guys were particularly staggered to see Joe Anderson was mired in allegations of corruption.
One of the things that had surprised me was that one of the Labour candidates to replace Joe Anderson is named Joanne Anderson, which I thought was, okay, I mean, it's not an ideal choice for a name at the right at this moment, right at this second. It's not really what we're looking for, is it?
Yeah, we'll throw her out. We'll elect not Joe Anderson. Definitely not Joe Anderson. Anyway, London are also holding election to see who's going to be the mayor. And, we're going to talk about London. A lot of people will conflate the entire of the UK to London. They'll think that, Boris Johnson was the mayor of London and therefore the mayor of the entire country, because people occasionally think that what happens in London reflects everything that happens around the rest of the country and nothing exists that doesn't happen in London. But we are going to focus on London for just a little bit. So who's going to be the London mayor? So you've got the incumbent Sadiq Khan, the Labour candidate who replaced Boris Johnson. Or you've got the unfancied Tory candidate Sean Bailey, who's polling at around 28%. So I think Sadiq Khan in the latest opinion polls is in like the 50 or 60% of people say they want to vote for him. So he's basically a shoo-in. You've got Sean Bailey at about 28%. Or there's the Green Party candidate Sian Berry or the Lib Dem candidate Louisa Porritt, who are each polling at single digits. So they look very unlikely. But that's not the whole pack of candidates. There's actually around 15 independent candidates running. And they range from the current UKIP candidate, Peter Gammons. Love the fact that UKIP are trying to elect Gammons. Say what you see.
Wow. Joanne Anderson's name doesn't seem as bad now, somehow.
Yeah, so you've got the current UKIP candidate, Peter Gammons, running for mayor. You've got the former UKIP member, David Curtin, running for mayor, Kurten. He's running for the Heritage Party, who is against the COVID vaccine, explicitly so. And he also thinks there's a concerted effort to confuse children over their gender as part of the trans agenda. So he's a bit of a conspiracy theorist there. Or you've got Lawrence Fox running. He's running on an anti-PC platform, claiming that the woke left are ruining our country. Or you've got the anti-vaccine COVID denier Piers Corbyn running for London Mayor. He's the brother of Jeremy Corbyn. So there's a lot of interesting views amongst the independent candidates. Not all of the independent candidates, but those are kind of some select ones. None of those independent candidates are in with the shout, because collectively all 15 independents poll below 5% at the moment. So there's not a cat in hell's chance that any of them are getting in. There is one independent candidate that stands out from the rest, not because he's got any greater hope of winning, because his polling figures are part of that 5% of other, but because he's actually currently the second favourite with the bookmakers to win. That would be Brian Rose, who is described by the BBC as a former banker who set up the media firm London Real. And that is a description of Brian Rose that I'd argue, and I'm about to argue, is missing some pretty important salient details, some of which might explain why his betting odds are so short, even though his chances of winning are so catastrophically long. So let me explain Brian Rose. You guys both know Brian Rose, I think?
Yeah.
Nope.
You don't know, you've not seen Brian Rose?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
I mean, you might get halfway through this and we go, oh, yeah. But right now, not ringing a bell.
I think you'll get through it and it'll ring some bells. So listeners to Incredulous, it will ring a bell. You've heard me talk about Brian Rose before. We covered him on one of the episodes you produced last year, which was actually before he announced his candidacy. He is a former investment banker. I think he's an American guy. He's been an investment banker for some of the bigger investment firms, or some investment firms rather. And then he turned business guru, who runs these online business accelerator courses for essentially would-be entrepreneurs. And for a fairly large fee, you can talk to him about your business ideas, and he'll share with you the kind of business acumen that he used when he was creating his very lucrative business of telling you how great your business ideas are. He's doing very well at that. He charges a lot of money for that, and he can share with you that kind of acumen so you can use it for your own business. It kind of reminds me of like prosperity gospel. Look how rich I am. That's how much God wants you to be rich. I'm an example of that. So give me loads of money to demonstrate how rich you can make me as a way of demonstrating that God makes you rich. It has that kind of thing. Or it's got the feel of that old newspaper classified scam that used to run. There was, I don't know if you know this one, where you'd see an ad that was promising to tell you how to make money quickly and easily. All you need to do is send £10 in an envelope to this address. And then if you send them a tenner, you get a letter back from them saying, right, what you do is you take an advert out in the paper asking people to send you a tenner.
Yeah.
And that is essentially that.
Yeah, do what I did.
So Rose promotes these. It's not just Business Accelerator. He does other courses as well. I'll come to a couple in a moment. But he promotes his various self-improvement courses via a prolific YouTube presence on his channel London Real, this media company that the BBC mentioned. And he's published more than 6,000 videos since 2011. Some of those videos are of him breakdancing, which are worth watching because he is a former investment banker in, I'd say, his 50s, thinking he is a really lithe and athletic and rhythmic street dancer. And he's none of those things. And it's quite good if you like watching middle-aged men breakdance in ways that they think they're recapturing their youth. But most of his videos are interviews with interesting people. But a lot of those 6,000 videos are essentially one interview that he's done that he then chunks up into small clips and then releases like a dozen clips from that one interview. So put the full interview out and then also here's what this guest said about this. So you kind of generate a lot of content that way. And they're interviews with people with all manner of interests, some genuinely interesting people, some names that our listeners would know. So Brian Rose has interviewed Noam Chomsky, Steven Pinker, John Ronson, David Nutt, Nick Davies, the investigative journalist who uncovered the phone hacking scandal. And in theory, he speaks to women as well. Though there's not a lot of evidence of that. Most of the women on his YouTube channel appear to be people who have graduated from his Business Accelerator program, or at least have paid to be part of that program. I didn't look through all his videos. Maybe there is a tranche of lady videos that I've missed. Don't know. Certainly if you have a scroll down, you see a lot of men on there, essentially. He also approached Simon Singh, who I obviously work with. He approached Simon for an interview, and Simon thought it all looked a bit iffy, so Simon turned him down. Rose has interviewed people with some pretty unusual views. So in the past, he's interviewed Jordan Peterson. So Jordan Peterson could essentially say untrue things about what Canadian equality laws would force him to say and do. He's interviewed men's rights activists. He's pushed out The Secret in interviews. He's talked about how to heal yourself drinking urine. And in all of these interviews, to be clear, I mean, I would talk through many of those different topics on Be Reasonable, but I would put those forward in a way of saying, here are some things that aren't true. Let's explore them. That isn't Rose's style of interview. It's very much, so tell me this revolutionary world-changing idea that you're putting forward. Isn't that amazing? Wow, isn't that great? God, that's so strange. Wow, that really putting this forward. So when he interviews someone who says they're going to heal themselves drinking urine, he's not there to push back. He offers about the same amount of pushback as like Joe Rogan or someone like that. Since the start of the pandemic, though, Brian Rose's videos have taken on a conspiracy theory and anti-vaccination theme. In April 2020, he very famously interviewed David Icke. That was the interview in which Icke claimed that 5G caused COVID, that it was all just a big deliberate ploy by the UK government to reduce the population to fill the mortuaries and things. It was the interview that famously reached literally hundreds of thousands of live viewers on YouTube before YouTube pulled the plug. And when it was broadcast on a local TV channel in London, it resulted in a complaint that was upheld by Ofcom saying to that channel, never do that again or we'll fine you, basically.
And can I, at this point, say, Oh, yeah, I know the guy you mean now.
There we go. From there, Brian Rose interviewed Andrew Wakefield so that he could explain why vaccines are evil under the guise of championing free speech. He then spoke to Michael Shermer, editor of Skeptic magazine in the US, who agreed how awful it was that YouTube wouldn't allow Rose to spread his videos. The videos, to be clear, of David Icke and Andrew Wakefield sharing anti-vaccine misinformation. When the anti-vax film Plandemic produced a sequel, Brian Rose was the guy who hosted the world premiere of it on his website. So Plandemic 2 was premiered on Brian Rose's website, which is a website that was specifically built as a free speech platform where you could say anything you like as long as it agreed with Rose's particular biases. According to the figures that Rose reported at the time of producing this platform, he raised more than £1 million to create this website which hosts video content. In there, he hosted videos with anti-vaxxers like Robert Kennedy, Judy Mikovich, Alex Jones, Mickey Willis, Sherry Tenpenny, and on and on and on. Of the £1 million he raised to launch this platform, that was already launched after he'd raised about 200 grand. £200,000 of that 1 million was to be able to add decentralized blockchain ledger technology to the website, which didn't happen, to the best that we could tell. I'm not even really sure what that means. I don't know how would you add decentralized blockchain ledger technology to a website, Mike?
That sounds very much like using a lot of techno jargon to get investors to give you money, because a blockchain is not a remotely appropriate piece of technology for the kind of website that sounds like that was.
Yeah. Well, to the best of our knowledge, it never happened, but he said he raised $250,000, so about 200 grand for it. He also raised £200,000 to turn the website into an app, which I don't think happened, despite the fact that the money was raised and went to him. And listeners may well be thinking, Marsh, everybody has a right to free speech, even people we disagree with. So surely Brian Rose is a hero for giving David Icke and Andrew Wakefield a place where they can tell hundreds of thousands of people not to get vaccinated. Personally, I'm unconvinced by that argument. I think it's perfectly fine to deny people a platform when that platform is being used to say, here is why you shouldn't take this public health measure that will save your life and the lives of people around you. I think there is a responsibility there to make sure we don't platform cranks. Also, the idea that Brian Rose isn't spreading David... So I posted on Twitter about this and someone said, Brian Rose isn't spreading David Icke's misinformation. He's just having an interview with him because he believes in free speech. It's like, yes, an interview that he then shared to hundreds of thousands of people that would not have gone ahead because Icke wouldn't have been able to reach hundreds of thousands of people online in that kind of way had Rose not done it. And Rose offered zero pushback. That is the definition in my mind of spreading that information. But I'm also personally unconvinced that Brian Rose is as committed to free speech as he says. I think he's actually less committed to free speech than he is committed to making money from sharing exclusively opinions he agrees with as an act of free speech. For one, the terms and conditions of his website give him the right to remove any content he disagrees with. For another, comments that are critical of him on any of the platforms where you can leave comments are very swiftly removed like it never happened. So the free speech warrior Brian Rose is very happy to remove the comments of people that criticize him in other ways. And for a third, on his Freedom Platform TV, this platform he's made, of the 57 interviews he's hosted on there, 16 of them are anti-vaccine myths, 11 of them are COVID-19 conspiracy theories and misinformation, and 10 of the others are conspiracy theories of other forms. And the remaining 20, you could describe them as scientifically neutral, but conspiracy adjacent. So, for example, one of those 20 is an interview with James Lindsay about how the woke agenda is ruining the world. So this kind of political talking point, culture war kind of bullshit. Now, that's the same James Lindsay who believes and has tweeted about how he believes that the Great Reset at the World Economic Forum is actually a plan for the elite to kill 5 billion people around the world as a way of depopulating the planet. That's that James Lindsay. So it's very fair, I think, to call him conspiracy theory adjacent. He didn't share a conspiracy theory at the time. I haven't watched the whole video. Maybe there's one in there, but he's very clearly a conspiracy theorist. Similarly, Brian Rose interviewed Candace Owens, the conservative commentator, about various conservative culture war talking points. And again, Candace Owens has shared COVID conspiracy theories, and she's shared other conspiracy theories about, for example, how there is a deliberate plot to destroy Western civilization. If you're peddling conspiracy theories, the London mayoral candidate Brian Rose seems very willing to give you a space to do so, as long as it's on a space where he makes money, as best as I can tell. Personally, I think this looks like a business sales pipeline to me. His product, the thing he's actually selling and making real money out of, is self-improvement courses whose target audience is essentially the confused would-be millionaire. One of those courses is called the Broadcast Yourself course. It's an 8-week course on how to do a podcast. 8-week course on starting your own podcast. That costs $3,000. Unless you pay for the premium tier, which is more, or the inner circle tier, which is even more than that, but the costs aren't available anywhere online. God knows how much the inner circle of the 8-week premium podcasting course is going to cost. Week 1, so the first whole week, the first module of your How to Do a Podcast is why to start a podcast. I can't see the content in the course, but the accompanying screenshots on his website clearly shows it's an 11-minute video. There may be other videos as well. There may be other things that go alongside of it, but you've got your 11-minute why to start a podcast video in there. Module 3 is building a cutting-edge platform, which Rose explains what that actually involves, and he means which microphone to buy and which editing software to use. Module 4 is how to book guests for your podcast, including an email template for sending guests an email inviting them to your podcast. This doesn't seem to me like high-level stuff. It also doesn't seem to me like something you need to spend £3,000 or $3,000 on before you start a podcast, especially when podcasts are so fucking ubiquitous now that everybody has one. I don't think we didn't pay $3,000 before we started this. But what about his business accelerator course? You know, he's a businessman, he's an investment banker, he's a guru. Surely that's got something going up for it. Well, his business accelerator course costs somewhere around £15,000 to £20,000. And there are dozens of complaints about it filed to websites that warn people about financial scams, including complaints that the course content absolutely did not match what was promised, that it didn't deliver, that Brian Rose failed to turn up for some of the meetings that they paid for, and that the course insisted that, yes, it has a money-back guarantee, but to get that money-back guarantee, you've got to complete every single module of the course perfectly before they'd honor it. And then participants also complained elsewhere that the to-do lists that are involved in completing each module perfectly were so deliberately unrealistic that they were onerously challenging, possibly to try and generate reasons to reject refund requests. Well, you haven't even given the course a proper go because you didn't do all of the things. There are people saying, I've done all of the things, and then the course conveners would look through to try and quibble with the details of which ones you've done. You said you'd done this YouTube video, but this link actually, someone else has got the same link somewhere, so you didn't do that. And just trying to find reasons to reject your refund request. I don't know. That's just what I've seen that's publicly available on these websites. But what I do know is to sell a product like that, a £15,000 to £20,000 business accelerator course, you need to get as many people as possible into your initial pipeline of potential leads. Thinking from a purely sales point of view, you need to reach as many people as possible and then whittle those down to people who are likely to take it and try and reach it from there. And you want to try and whittle them down to people who are really, really persuaded by you and also who have got the money to spend on that or are willing to spend the money on that. With that as your business goal, you can then start to see why London Real operates the way it does. Why would he be pushing out thousands of short video introductions with incredibly eye-catching thumbnails and titles promising to answer this question or put a hot button topic to an author or a guest? I think it's to try and catch as many people as possible. They're essentially the sign outside the shop enticing people in. Once they're in, Rose's commentary on videos and in the videos in themselves, in the videos he posts in between the big interviews, they are the sales pitch directing people, 1, over to the Freedom Platform TV, where the most extreme views are, and 2, directing people to take his pricey business courses. You don't need to sell that many £20,000 business courses per year to get by. And even if you end up giving half of them a refund, you're still doing pretty well for yourself, I think, there. And I actually reached out to some of the people that Brian Rose interviewed on his YouTube channel, like the front-facing one, not the Freedom Platform, the one that's on YouTube, to explain essentially what I think is their role in his sales pipeline. And in my opinion, you could see this as them being the respectable face of his attempts to drive people towards his self-improvement courses that have been highly criticized and towards donating to his, most of these videos claim COVID is a hoax and you shouldn't take the vaccine platform. One of the guests that I spoke to expressed his extreme unease at being used that way, but he's reluctant to ask to have the video removed and felt it was quite a serious step to do that. But several other guests were actually appalled that they'd been misled. They felt they'd been misled by Brian Rose and his team and told me they'd asked to have the videos taken down. And Nick Davies from The Guardian told me he was even happy to be on record as a quote. And he said, this is a direct quote from Nick Davies, he said, "I think that Brian Rose recently has done a great deal of damage to his credibility. If he'd done it before his assistant asked me to be interviewed by him, I would have said no." Rose also planned to hold an in-person conference event, a one-day event for all of his fans, the London Real Summit. That was due to take place in last September. It's now going to take place this September. It features 4 speakers, including Brian Rose, and you can go there for the low, low price of £147 for the standard package for the one day. Other packages cost £297 or £497 or £997. And there's even a diamond package which costs £1,497 for his one-day full-speaker event. Now, I don't imagine there's going to be many people paying the £1,500 price, which essentially includes a reserved front row seat to this 200-seater event, plus you get to meet Brian Rose and you get to ask questions at the Q&A. But I guarantee that diamond package helps anchor people up to the ticket price above standard. When you've got the 150 quid, the 300 quid, and the 500 quid, and then the 1,500, I think more people are going to go for the £300 than would otherwise if it was only 2 options available there. That event is due to take place in London's South Bank Centre in September. Except it isn't, because I contacted the South Bank Centre to ask them about it, and they emailed back to tell me the London Real Summit 2021 is not booked to take place at the South Bank Centre in 2021. We were aware he's been advertising this on their website previously, and we asked them to remove the South Bank Centre from their website, which they did. We were not aware that the venue was still listed on their Facebook page. I'm going to contact them right now and ask them to remove this immediately. I've made it clear the name of our venue has to be removed from any of their channels. So Brian Rose is selling £1,500 tickets to an event at a venue that has told him to stop using their name because he's not having it at their venue. This is the man who's running for the mayor of London. There are venues in London that are having to tell him to stop falsely using their name in his marketing. So let's talk about his mayoral campaign in that light. Brian Rose hired a digital battle bus that he was using to travel around all the boroughs of London, campaigning in part against the COVID lockdown. And he was using it to continue campaigning while we were all under stay-at-home orders. He was going out there regardless and still campaigning around. That particular stunt of campaigning during the stay-at-home order earned him a police caution, which got featured in almost every national newspaper. And every single one of those mentioned about how he's, fighting to be mayor of London, how he's a prominent free speech campaigner, how he's a prominent businessman, how he wants to reopen London. None of them happened to mention his links to COVID misinformation and the anti-vaccine propaganda. I imagine that publicity perfectly played into the free speech champion image that he's been cultivating and using to solicit online donations to his political campaign, and also to his freedom platform, and probably to his business accelerator courses as well. In fact, it's quite hard at times to see where his mayoral campaign ends and his for-profit business begins, which is arguably something of a concern for a political campaign. And I know there are plenty of listeners who have seen Brian Rose's adverts. He's prolific at paid-for advertising on YouTube. He's taken out billboard advertising across the country. I think not just in London. I think there's even billboards outside of London, even though you can't vote unless you're in London. I'm not fully sure how that works, given that there are really tight limits on campaign spending in the UK. It's not like America. We've got very, very tight campaign spending limits. I think it's about £420,000, I think you're allowed to spend on the mayoral campaign. Between the digital battle bus and the billboards and the many, many, many online ads on YouTube and the 4 or 5 staff members he appears to have working for him on his campaign, I'd advise Brian Rose to be very careful about keeping those receipts. Because when you bear in mind that an advert taken out by his company, London Real, his for-profit company, London Real, if that advert mentions his mayoral campaign, that has to be declared as campaign spending. That's in-kind contribution, as does any London Real employees who work for Brian's campaign during their day job. There are many aspects of Brian Rose's mayoral campaign I'd love to see more reporting on. I'd love to know how much money Brian Rose is taking through online donations to his campaign. I'd also love to know how much of that is, if any of that, is coming from overseas. Brian Rose is doing he's doing these kind of online Zoom calls for his volunteers to get a volunteer army, he's calling it the London Real Army, out there to run his mayoral campaign for him. And I joined a couple of those Zoom calls with the camera off, obviously. And there were lots of people from countries that were from other countries around the world who weren't UK citizens. Many of them had been through his business accelerator courses. Many of them had been through courses where they'd given him money in the past. And they said they'd been supporting him. They weren't clear if they meant financially. If they are making financial contributions from abroad and they're not UK citizens and they're contributing to a UK political campaign, that will be problematic. You know, political campaigns can't accept foreign contributions, just as they can't exceed the strict spending limits. I'd also love to see how donations to his Freedom Platform TV have changed during the course of his campaign. And if they've grown at all while he's been in the newspapers being a outspoken free speech campaigner who keeps talking about how Sadiq Khan is ruining this great city and all the damage Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, is doing to this city, and how there's so much knife crime knocking around. And it's really hard not to hear his criticisms of Sadiq Khan and his criticisms of the knife crime epidemic as being a bit dog whistly. We've seen these coming from many of the UKIP candidates, and, you know, as you've seen, there's lots of UKIP candidates running for London Mayor. So there's a bit of a dog whistling thing going on there. I'd be really surprised if his numbers of YouTube subscribers haven't grown during his political campaign. I'd be surprised if he's not had even more interest in his I can make you rich businesses as a result of his political exploits. The fact that he's polling so badly, so he's part of that 5% of other, along with 14 other candidates. So he's polling that badly, yet doing so well with the bookies being in second place. The only thing that I can think is happening there is that a lot of his supporters, his very ardent supporters who may have even put money to his business accelerator programs, they're putting their money where his mouth is. And that's what's shifted the odds. And Mike, you'd know better than me whether that's likely to have been the case. But why else would somebody who is polling so badly that very clearly the majority of London are not voting for, 99% of London aren't voting for him, why would he be in second place in the bookies if not that he's got some ardent fans who are laying some money down?
No, that's exactly what happens at the bookies, is you'll have a trading team that will set the initial odds, but then the odds will shift in line with how people are actually betting on it. And so if he's second favourite, that's because a lot of people are putting money on him.
Yeah. So I feel pretty confident that while the anti-vaccine promoting free speech champion Brian Rose will lose the mayoral election, he will still somehow manage to come away from this campaign as a winner.
If the stories on this show can be said to have an established structure, and they certainly can't, but if they could, then it might be reasonable to characterize that structure as reference an article in the news which is misrepresenting something, often a piece of scientific research, discuss how it is misrepresented and or misses the point of the research, often just in terms of, just bogus reasoning. They just got this wrong.
Explain its relevance to 1970s Doctor Who.
That's always a good one. Locate the actual paper and expose the limited methodology, often because the research was conducted in rats or on 6 people, or where the control was just what they reckon might have happened if they hadn't done an intervention at all. Maybe we acknowledge the value of the study in and of itself. It's, it's a piece of preliminary work, it's a pilot study, etc., and is not intended to be the final word on the issue. We might acknowledge that one. And then we criticize the press for taking it as the final word on the issue and reporting on that basis, therefore misleading the public into thinking that magic beans cure cancer or avoiding fizzy drinks will regrow your limbs or whatever. That's a reasonably common format for stories on this show. This week, however, I'm going to flip that on its head because I'm going to talk about the paper first.
Okay.
So this is a paper that was published in JAMA Pediatrics, and it was titled Placebo Effect in the Treatment of Acute Cough in Infants and Toddlers, a Randomized Clinical Trial. 119 children, so reasonable numbers, but not fantastic. 119 children aged between 2 months and 47 months, so that's newborns to just under 4 years old, who had had a cough for more than 7 days and had visited their GP with it, were recruited into this study. The inclusion criteria specifically excluded children who had any symptom which suggested it might have been a more serious underlying condition like asthma or pneumonia. And they were only interested in children with acute non-specific coughs, although they may have had, a runny nose and congestion, the usual shtick that you get when you've got a sick toddler. The children were randomized into one of 3 groups. There was an active treatment group, a placebo group, and a no treatment group, which is unusual to see. You don't get a lot of no treatment groups. So it was nice to see a no treatment group in there.
But it's a cough.
But it's a cough, indeed, yeah.
Fuck them.
The no treatment group obviously got no treatment. The placebo group were given grape-flavoured water, and the active treatment group were given grape-flavoured agave nectar, which is marketed as a natural cough syrup. So as best I can see, this was a placebo versus a totally different kind of placebo versus no treatment, because agave nectar is going to do fuck all for your cough.
Yes, yeah. But that's fair if this is trying to work out whether a cough syrup is a placebo or not.
Yeah, whether agave nectar works, which is the point of the study.
That's the point of the study, yeah.
Agave nectar was their active treatment.
I thought it would be rather than the grape-flavoured. It'd be weird if the grape-flavoured water was their active treatment.
Upon recruitment, patients were asked to retrospectively assess their child's symptoms on the night before they went to the GP. They were asked to rate the severity of those symptoms on a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 was not at all and 7 was very often or severe. Specifically, they were asked, how often did your child cough last night? 1 for not at all, 7 for very often. How severe was your child's cough last night? 1 for not at all severe and 7 for very severe. How bothersome was your child's cough? How severe was their runny nose? How severe
Is that bothersome to you or bothersome to the child?
Non-specific in the case of the questionnaire.
So, it fucked me right off. It fucked me right off.
How severe was their runny nose? How severe was their stuffy nose? How much did the cough affect their ability to sleep? And how much did the cough affect your ability to sleep? So given that they split the question at the end there, the earlier one might have just been, how bothersome was it to you? Who knows?
That's weird, splitting the end, because you're talking about a young child.
Yeah.
Your ability to sleep entirely determines the result of their ability to sleep.
Yeah, if you're asleep, you don't know that they're awake.
If you slept through, you'd be like, yeah, no, they didn't wake up once.
That evening, the children in the treatment and placebo arms were then given their intervention 30 minutes before bedtime. And within 30 minutes of waking, the parents completed the same questionnaire again. How often did your child cough? How severe was the cough, etc. Same 1 to 7 scale. And the results were compared to the previous night, to the baseline that they'd taken for the previous night. So this measured a single intervention, 1 dose on 1 night, which, to be honest, doesn't strike me as the most rigorous methodology. But regardless, what are the results? All 3 groups reported an improvement from baseline on the previous night. Not a surprise, really, because it turns out coughs get better.
Yeah.
The placebo group and the active treatment, the Agave Nectar, had statistically significant improvements compared to the no treatment group, except for bothersomeness, where the p-value there was 0.06, so just outside of significance. But that's not a surprise, because nobody knows what fucking bothersomeness means. But the placebo group and the Agave Nectar group had no statistically significant differences between each other. They were both better than baseline, but both better than no treatment, but were not better than each other. So over to you guys. What do you think the take-home message of this study would be, given that that is the conclusion? What's the conclusion that you would write?
Gotcha. So what we've proved is placebo cures coughs.
Agave syrup no better than placebo.
That sounds like a good headline finding to me.
Well, what the Daily Telegraph reported this as was placebo cough medicine benefits children and parents, study suggests. WebMD reported this as placebo treatment may quiet kids' coughs. And the New York Times wrote this as placebo may aid babies' coughs. And the Daily Mail said give children fake cough medicine to treat their symptoms, scientists say.
I mean, yes, do that, because fake cough medicine is going to be cheaper than real cough medicine, and they're both going to be useless.
But it rather all misses the fucking point, to my mind.
Yeah. This is good, because I'm really annoyed that Nicola has cough medicine. She uses like the honey type stuff medicine, and it's on top of the bathroom cabinet, and I see it every time I go in. And even worse, the way that the box is structured, it's facing towards me the message that says traditional remedy based on traditional use only. Annoys me every time.
Yeah. It's that weasel word shit that the regulator makes you put on there that everyone just ignores, isn't it? The crown for missing the point, however, has to go to Fox News, who reported this study as Agave Nectar safe and effective for children's coughs, study suggests. The actual conclusion that we should be drawing from these data, of course, limited though they are, is that Agave Nectar does not fucking work. Or more accurately, these data do not show that Agave Nectar works. That's what not statistically different to placebo means. But somehow Fox News manages to report exactly the opposite of the conclusion of the paper. Because if giving children grape-flavoured water has the same effect as giving them grape-flavoured nectar, then whatever else happens to be improving their condition, it's definitely not the nectar. Maybe it's grape flavouring. Maybe grape flavouring is really, really good for a cough, but it's not fucking nectar.
Was the grape-flavoured water wine? Were they just giving the baby a little bit of wine, and then the baby was too leathered to cough?
It was just, it was a euphemism the whole time. Yeah, grape juice. Yeah, that's what it is. Grape juice, mate. Yeah. The placebo effect, as listeners may be aware, is something of a bugbear of mine. I think the placebo effect is bollocks. My view is that placebo effects are artifacts of the research process, manifesting in the data and not in the patient. They're mostly comprised of biases of various types, maybe classical conditioning, maybe some CBT in there, whatever, which puts me at odds with great swathes of the skeptical community who often profess a belief in the power of placebo.
Smaller and smaller swathes, the more that you talk about it, and the further that we can show the evidence that you're putting together.
My go-to paper on this is the Placebo Powerless, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2001, which compares placebo to no treatment in randomized controlled trials for various conditions, and found that there was no placebo effect for binary outcomes. That is a simple yes-no question. No placebo effect for objectively measurable outcomes, that is, outcomes where the opinion of the clinician and the patient cannot influence the data. And the only cases where they found placebo to be statistically significant to no treatment was in the case of continuous subjective outcomes. For example, how much does it hurt? How nauseated do you feel? And how bothersome is your child's cough on a scale of 1 to 7? And in continuous subjective outcomes, there is massive potential, especially when blinding is broken, for the biases of the patient and the clinician to impact on the data. Although the paper makes it clear that the clinicians involved were blinded, the parents of the children who received no treatment clearly knew that they were in the no treatment group because they weren't actually shoving anything grape-flavored down their child's throat, unlike everyone else who was in the study. And, of course, because their child hadn't been given any medicine, not even fake medicine, they are less likely to report any improvements. They're less likely to notice any improvements because they aren't expecting any to happen. They're less likely to exaggerate reports of improvements that they do see in order to please the clinicians, things like that. It is therefore no surprise, of course, that the placebo arm of this study fared significantly better than the no treatment arm. This is why we do placebo arms in clinical trials, because when you compare against no treatment, you introduce massive, massive biases into the data, biases that even clinicians can mistake for genuine effects. Case in point, the conclusion to this very paper. This paper concluded, both physicians and parents want symptomatic relief for children with these common and annoying illnesses. The significant placebo effect found warrants consideration as healthcare providers and parents determine how best to manage the disruptive symptoms that occur in the setting of respiratory tract infections among young children. But no, it doesn't. Being better than no treatment does not mean that. You're giving placebos to sick children to convince their parents that their cough is not as bad, when actually you've done nothing to the cough at all. All you've done is modify the bias of the parent in favor of seeing an improvement. The placebo does not introduce any actual improvement because that's what a placebo's for. You don't want it to introduce an actual improvement, otherwise it'll fuck your study. It rather reminds me of that acupuncture study that showed no difference between acupuncture and sham acupuncture, which was reported as acupuncture is so effective that it even works when you fake it.
Yes.
Now, I might be cynically inclined to suggest that this was the reason behind the inclusion of a no treatment arm in this study to begin with, was to give them a baseline that was likely to show an improvement for the agave nectar, given that the study was paid for by the manufacturer of the nectar.
Right. Yeah.
And without the no treatment arm, this would have been an unequivocally negative study. And it still is an unequivocally negative study. It's just been presented as positive, even by the authors and in the press. Now, I might also be inclined to cynically suggest that the reason for the odd interpretation of these clearly negative data is that Zabis, which is the company that makes the grape-flavored agave nectar cough syrup, they're the ones that funded the study. That's why you would interpret this data in a peculiar way, because when faced with data like, as a scientist, when faced with data like this, you either tell the world that your corporate paymaster's syrup doesn't work, or you say that both syrup and placebo work really well as a way of trying to spin some positive result out of the person who's just hired you to figure out whether their stuff works or not. And of course, the authors plumped for the latter. Although how the fuck they managed to get that interpretation beyond peer review is beyond me.
It's not beyond me.
And the newspaper coverage of these data, even from the sources that should know better, like WebMD, was placebo effect works for coughs, which is utterly ridiculous bollocks and a demonstration of the infuriating scientific illiteracy that we find in the popular press.
You assume that WebMD should know better, and they should if they're going to use a name like WebMD. WebMD is full of bollocks.
It is.
Absolutely full of it.
Yeah. And this in turn leads to the public being misled about science and scientists and how they work and how they do their stuff, and which erodes public trust in science in general. And it stinks. And the worst part is that I don't think anyone's being malicious about this. No one's sitting there twirling their mustache. But I did quite enjoy starting with the study and then trying to figure out what the headline was that went along with it. So I've devised a little game, which I know Alice always enjoys.
What Alice loves is the pressure that the game puts on her.
The pressure of like, go Alice, be funny now. which is why I don't go on Incredulous anymore. Because that's why Andy Wilson goes, be funny now. And if you're lucky, he'll go, ah! Which is the best noise in the world, is something tickling Andy Wilson, and he goes, ah! and then into his laugh. So I've got 3 studies here.
Okay.
I'm going to very briefly go through each one, and then you can guess the newspaper headlines, and you can confer if you'd like. So the first study, modafinil increases the latency response in the Hailing sentence completion test in healthy volunteers, a randomized controlled trial. And this was published in PLOS ONE. Modafinil is a drug that's used to treat narcolepsy because it has the effect of increasing wakefulness in patients. It also has a reputation as a cognitive enhancer, so a clever pill, in that it's meant to make you smarter, although the evidence for this is equivocal at best. So this study took 64 healthy students, randomized them into 2 groups. One group got a dose of modafinil and the other got placebo. 2 hours later, the students were given the Hailing sentence completion test, which is where you're given a sentence with the final word missing, and you have to guess what the word is. The study measured both the latency, so how long it took them to think of a word, and the accuracy, so whether they get the word right. And the results showed that while there was no difference between the groups in terms of accuracy, the students taking modafinil had higher latency, so they were actually slower at guessing a word when they were on the drug. How do you think this was reported in the Daily Telegraph?
You're better at conversation when you're sleepy.
Any improvement on that, Alice? No? The Telegraph reported this as smart drug may improve creative problem solving, despite the findings of the paper showing the opposite of that.
What?
So I was thinking I couldn't figure out how to put this into words, but I was thinking something along this line. So the idea is that you're spending more time actually, you're not just guessing and saying a word out loud. You're actually thinking about what the word is and pausing for a moment to think. Okay. And maybe that's the argument, that you're being more intelligent about how you solve the problem.
What I like is that Alice was answering that with a larger latency,
bigger latency
in itself. Yeah. So clearly she's on a smart drug and more intelligent, because it took her longer to come up with an answer.
Second one. This is a paper titled "Do Orgasms Give Women Feedback About Mate Choice?" which was published in the journal Evolutionary Psychology. 54 female undergraduates took part in an anonymous online survey about their sexual behavior and experience. All the students volunteered for the survey and were enrolled on a psychology course at State University of New York, and they got course credit for taking part.
Alice is already shaking her head and rolling her eyes.
All of the women involved were in committed sexual relationships at the time with a man, and the survey included questions about their male partner's income, age, sense of humor, physical attractiveness, and so on. The women were also asked how often they orgasmed, how intense the orgasms were, how often she initiated sex, and her overall level of sexual satisfaction.
Wait, nothing about who's giving her the orgasm.
That's fair.
So this could be women who are just masturbating all the time and having loads of orgasms, and it's nothing to do with their partner giving them orgasms.
That's fair.
But they're going to make an assumption from this paper that the orgasms that they have are directly related to the partner that they've chosen.
That's totally fair.
And then they're going to make inferences based on his income and job title.
Jesus.
The results showed that the frequency of female orgasms was correlated to the male partner's income, his self-confidence, and his attractiveness. And the intensity of the orgasms correlated with attractiveness, how often they had sex, and overall sexual satisfaction. And the likelihood of the woman initiating sex was correlated with a male partner's sense of humor. How do you think this was covered in the Daily Mail?
Funny men are sexier.
Yeah, I could see that. Or if you want a better sex life, date a rich man.
Women have stronger orgasms if their partner is funny and rich, study finds.
Hey, both of us.
Jesus, that's bad.
Despite the study actually finding that it was orgasm frequency that is correlated with income, and the likelihood of the woman initiating sex was correlated with a sense of humour, the male reported both of these things as increasing orgasm intensity, which is not remotely what this study said at all. And on top of that, it's a ridiculously underrepresentative study based on an online survey taken by a handful of students who were self-reporting their partner's income and attractiveness.
And doesn't actually say how they fucking orgasmed.
Yeah, and they're incentivized to take part as well, which puts a little, like, incentivized with course credit, which is a bit funny.
Yeah. And finally, what's on TV? Detecting age-related neurodegenerative eye disease using eye movement scan paths. This was published in the journal Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience. 32 elderly patients with healthy vision and 44 elderly patients who had been diagnosed with glaucoma were recruited into this study. They were each asked to watch 3 video clips of no more than a few minutes each, played on a computer screen, and the computer was fitted with an eye-tracking camera which recorded their eye movements as they watched. The clips included the men's skiing from the 2010 Winter Olympics. They included part of an episode of Dad's Army, and part of the movie The History Boys by Alan Bennett. Tailoring to the audience there, I feel very much. The eye-tracking data was then used to attempt to work out if the patient suffered from glaucoma or not, presumably with a view to this being some new diagnostic tool. And around 3/4 of the participants were correctly diagnosed by the eye-tracking camera. It's interesting research. At 3/4 of the patients being accurately diagnosed is not brilliant accuracy, but interesting research. Maybe it'll go somewhere. Once again, the Daily Mail. How do you think the Mail covered this story?
Watching TV is good for your eye health.
Alice?
I have no thoughts on this whatsoever. I can't see how you can misrepresent this.
How watching Dad's Army can help detect the leading cause of blindness.
Jesus.
Gotcha. Like it was the Dad's Army specifically.
Yeah.
That was important.
Yeah, the Daily Mail totally missing the point in that the clips here are utterly irrelevant and they were just there to prompt eye movements for the tracker to look at. And it's the tracking data which is used to attempt to detect glaucoma, and even then it wasn't especially good at it. Sitting and watching any old episode of Dad's Army is not going to help you detect blindness. And so it's misleading and or inaccurate headlines all around there. And the big concern about this is how many people are reading articles like this and taking them at face value. People do not, and they should not be expected to, do background checks on every single story that they read in the press. That's what we expect journalists to be doing for us. And yet all too often when the press run a story about something that I know about, either because it's a topic that I happen to know or because it's one that I have cause to fact check because of this show, all too often the media reports are inaccurate or misleading. The Sunday Mirror yesterday ran a story about how Bonnie Langford is coming back to Doctor Who to shoot a lost script with Colin Baker and it's going to air next year. Absolute nonsense. Absolute gibberish. What happened is Russell T Davies, when he was a kid, well, he wasn't a kid, he would have been in his late teens, early 20s, but very, very early in his career, wrote a Doctor Who script on spec and failed to get it made. He recently found this script in a box, and now Big Finish are going to do an audio dramatization of it using the cast that would have made it if he'd managed to sell it to the BBC at the time.
Gotcha. So it was never a real script.
So it was never, like, I think he'd written one episode and he'd done an outline for episode 2 and it's being adapted by somebody to make it a real story, entirely because Russell T Davies is now a famous telly writer who did Doctor Who. And Bonnie Langford's coming back to do that for radio. It's not going to air next year. But also the headline was like, Bonnie returns to the TARDIS after 35 years. No, but she's been doing this for 20 years. She's been doing these audio plays. It's not a new thing. So what happens about the stuff that I don't know about? What happens about the stories that I haven't fact-checked? What about stories that I read in the paper that I take at face value because I don't have the expertise to realise that there's a mistake in them? How much bollocks am I believing? So, Skeptics in the Pub Online has got a very exciting event tonight, which is an all-new episode of Incredulous, Marsh.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's April 1st, we thought it'd be a really nice idea to put on some comedy. And so we've got an Incredulous episode. So Andy Wilson's going to be hosting it live, as always. And I'm going to be on there. We're going to have Kat Ford on there, who was fantastic last time she was on Incredulous. and Bryce Blankenagel from the Naked Mormon podcast, and Dave Anik, the magician and cult leader, is going to be on. So it's going to be a really fun panel, and that's all going to be live to watch on the Skeptics in the Pub online Twitch stream, which is twitch.tv/SITP from 7 p.m. UK time tonight.
And what's going on with The Skeptic?
Well, yeah, and obviously you can still see lots of interesting articles over at The Skeptic. We got some really interesting stuff that we've been publishing lately. We keep putting out excellent things, I think. I'm really happy with the stuff that we're doing. We've got some good ones coming up as well. So, yeah, always go to skeptic.org.uk to find the latest there.
And what's happening finally with Be Reasonable?
Be Reasonable. So I put out an episode last week, which was with Melina Ivovich. And Melina is somebody who is a believer and follower of the Knowledge Book, which is somebody I've been looking to interview for literally years. When I first came across the Knowledge Book at a Mind, Body, Spirit festival, the Knowledge Book being a book that the information in which was given to us by aliens from the Alpha Channel and beamed into the mind of an elderly Turkish lady in the 1980s, that you need to read and copy out the book by hand in order to imbue yourself with alpha energy to give yourself all manner of abilities and everlasting life and things. And I've wanted to interview somebody about that for a long, long time. And we finally managed to get someone to agree to be interviewed.
Yeah, I think we talked about it on this show at least once, I think.
Yeah, it's a story I've been telling for many years. And I was excited to finally be able to speak to Melina. It is, I think, an interesting conversation. It is a real insight into the groundings of that belief and how much of the terminology that we hear from lots of other places about quantum this and energy that, how that all sort of comes together to what is quite the worldview.
And you find that at merseyside-skeptics.org.uk and in whatever podcasting library and software you like to use. While we're on the subject of podcasts, it would be very useful, dear listeners, if we often ask you for Patreon income,
which you can do,
not very often, oddly enough, and that's a useful thing to do. But if you're not a Patreon person, one of the things that you can do to help us out is go and leave a review. We've not asked you to do this for a long time, but if you go to your podcasting platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or whatever, and just leave a review about, what you think of the show. And that helps us get more listeners into the show, which is always a useful thing. Other than that, then, I think that's all we have time for.
I think so.
All that remains is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We've been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website, www.merseyside-skeptics.org.uk, or email podcast@merseyside-skeptics.org.uk.